Petty revenge. Give out my phone number so you don't get calls. Cool. About 3 or 4 years ago, I started getting spam calls from realtors or real estate scammers, who knows, looking for Roy. They spammed me for a week or two, then it stopped. I forgot about it and moved on. Every once in a while, I'd get another one. Every time, it was about Roy selling property in a state on the opposite side of the country. Instead of telling the caller off like usual, I talked to them one night. They were happy to give me Roy's full name and the address of the property he kept dangling for sale. I looked him up. He had been using my phone number on all the real estate websites, so he didn't get bothered with calls. The calls died off. I forgot about it again. About 2 months ago, they started back up again. I remembered where I had written down Roy's info and checked him again for an updated phone number. This time, I lucked out and found his real cell phone. I considered texting him to stop giving out my number, but I didn't want to deal with a crotchety old man who thought he was getting one over on a stranger. The very next day, I got yet another phone call with an out-of-state area code. "Oh, are you looking for Roy? Hang on a sec, let me get you his phone number. It's 999-55-12-2. Are you related to Roy?" "Nope, never met the man. Or been to that city. I live about 3,000 miles away. But that bastard has been giving out my phone number for 4 years. So I did some research and found him. I don't know what you do for a living, but you should really be an investigator." "Why, thank you, I am. Would you mind updating your system with that phone number instead?" "I certainly will. Thank you for being so nice about this. I have not gotten a single call since." Edit. Fuck you, Roy. I looked up your house on Google Maps. It ain't the palace you think it is. Petty revenge. Sit there laughing at me at the petrol station. I'll inconvenience you even more. This was a few years ago. I pulled into my local petrol station. All the pumps were in use. So I pulled up behind one of the pumps, waiting for the van, using it to finish and move off. After quite a few mins, the driver casually strolled out of the shop in no hurry, despite the queue at the busy forecourt, and walked to his van. He could see that I and several other vehicles were queuing to use the pumps. The van driver in the pump next to him was obviously a friend. That driver finished up and the two of them stood and had a chat. They were aware of us waiting and were clearly loving the fact that they were holding us all up, even turning to laugh arrogantly at the guy waiting next to me, who called to them to move away from the pumps. This went on for 5 mins more until they got bored of their silly game and drove off. The moron was a plasterer and had his name and phone number written all over his van, plying his trade. Oh boy. I'm petty and made a note of his details. A few weeks later, I called him up and said I'd bought a house in need of renovation and needed a quote to board out and skim the entire house. Oh, he was only too happy to quote for a big project, assuring me he was great at his trade and I could not find a better quote. We discussed his availability and he was keen to come and look at the job. I gave him the address of a rundown house a few streets away from me that had recently sold at auction. He knew the property, he had driven past it a few times and noticed it was up for auction. We arranged for him to call the following day. Of course, I wasn't there. He rang a few times and left a voicemail checking where I was. Eventually, I called him back, very apologetic, said my husband had fallen off a ladder and I had to take him to A&E. He said, "Okay, I'll rearrange the visit." We arranged another time a few days later. The next appointment came and I had 2 more messages from him, clearly annoyed I wasn't there again. I called him back again and apologized. I said I could totally understand his anger and wasted time. It reminded me of the time I was sat at a petrol station a few weeks ago, and some idiot and his mate stood having a good old chat, whilst laughing at the drivers waiting to use the pumps. I heard the penny drop. That was when the raging and swearing started, which just set me off roaring with laughter. I made my point, it was fabulous. I spent the next few weeks blocking various numbers, sending abusive texts. But he got bored of that eventually. I hope he learned that actions have consequences. Petty revenge. Ding the door on my truck and parts will fall off of your transmission. My neighbor years ago opened her door into my truck and dinged it. I saw her do it, but she denied it and there were no witnesses or cameras. I filed a report, but was told it was, he said she said, and was a civil matter. I had just rebuilt a differential and had a jacked-up pinion gear. She drove a 4-wheel drive half-ton Chevy. I don't know what gave me the idea to do this, but I put the pinion gear under her truck and I put a heavy HVAC zip tie around her drive shaft so it would slap the muffler. I knew what time she left in the morning, so I came out and watched for her. She backed out of the parking spot. Tink, 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 tink. She stopped when she heard the noise, then she noticed the pinion gear on the ground. She got out and I walked up and asked her if something was wrong. She said her truck was making a funny sound and asked me if I knew what the pinion gear was. I told her it looked like it was part of a transmission and she better have it towed. She asked me if I knew of a good shop. Now this was not originally part of my plan, but I ran with it. I gave her the name of a shop that had a really bad reputation of being kind of shady. The truck was gone for 2 weeks. I asked her what she found out, and she told me the shop told her that she needed a new transmission and a bunch of other stuff. Apparently she ended up spending something like $3,500 to fix my zip tie and used car part on the ground. I took my truck into a body shop and had the door fixed for about $300. She was a snobbish bitch, and I know she was talking down to the people at the shop. She treated anyone that was not college-educated with disdain. Petty revenge. My neighbor years ago opened her door into my truck and dinged it. I saw her do it, but she denied it, and there were no witnesses or cameras. I filed a report, but was told it was, he said she said, and was a civil matter. I had just rebuilt a differential and had a jacked-up pinion gear. She drove a four-wheel drive half-ton Chevy. I don't know what gave me the idea to do this, but I put the pinion gear under her truck and I put a heavy HVAC zip tie around her drive shaft so it would slap the muffler. I knew what time she left in the morning, so I came out and watched for her. She backed out of the parking spot. Tink, 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 tink. She stopped when she heard the noise, then she noticed the pinion gear on the ground. She got out and I walked up and asked her if something was wrong. She said her truck was making a funny sound and asked me if I knew what the pinion gear was. I told her it looked like it was part of a transmission and she better have it towed. She asked me if I knew of a good shop. Now this was not originally part of my plan, but I ran with it. I gave her the name of a shop that had a really bad reputation of being kind of shady. The truck was gone for 2 weeks. I asked her what she found out, and she told me the shop told her that she needed a new transmission and a bunch of other stuff. Apparently she ended up spending something like $3,500 to fix my zip tie and used car part on the ground. I took my truck into a body shop and had the door fixed for about $300. She was a snobbish bitch, and I know she was talking down to the people at the shop. She treated anyone that was not college-educated with disdain. Petty revenge. What my mom did when her kid was gifted a jokebook. I remember this happening and thinking it was funny. But as I've gotten older, I've realized exactly how badass my parents were. So 40 years ago for Christmas, my mom's college roommate, whom she was still close to having been not that far removed from college, gave me a jokebook for Christmas. I was 5 and was starting to read pretty good. And apparently I drove my entire family absolutely bonkers with this book. I remember loving the book and taking it with me everywhere, taught jokes to everyone who came across my path. The next Christmas, my mom's college roommate's son was turning 5. So my parents went to Radio Shack and bought a gift for this kid. It was a wearable fireman's helmet with working lights and siren. They made sure to include batteries. My parents have always been very kind, forgiving, non-confrontational, so this bit of pettiness fills me with endless amusement. Petty revenge. Don't piss off someone who knows lots about weed killers. We shifted countries for career opportunities. Leased our lovely 2-story home up a steep driveway, long-term to a well-known local socialite and local government publicity manager. All was good. Then his mum with early dementia arrived, and our home was suddenly unsuitable. The driveway was declared dangerous. It wasn't. The staircase was illegal. It wasn't. The upstairs deck railings were unsafe. They weren't. He wriggled and squirmed to get out without breaking his lease. We offered to help, but he was hard to deal with. Suddenly the rent stopped. He'd done a runner and disappeared. It annoyed us, and we lost money in rent and paying tidying up costs. But it wasn't worth pursuing legally, especially as we're busy overseas. 2 years later we returned, and while visiting my brother in another city, I saw a nice old Jaguar XJ6 I recognized. It was Mr. Tennant's. He'd bought a house down the road from Little Bro. That afternoon, my knowledge as farm agrochemicals advisor kicked in. I visited a farm supply and garden center, bought paint aerosols and 2 long-term herbicides. That night, embarrassing graffiti appeared on his front fence, calling him a cheat and a wanker. And after he'd got that removed, his roadside verge lawn had a huge cunt slowly emerge, which took months to disappear, despite him top-dressing it and trying to reseed it. What a pity. Petty revenge. Steal my meds, so you get the flu. This happened over 10 years ago. I had been living with this guy, and I kept my prescriptions in a basket on the counter. I noticed that my PRN Valium was low, and I just had it filled. I went and got a refill, and the next week it was low. Now mind you, I hadn't taken any. Come to find out the guy was supplying his buddies with my Valium. So I get a bottle of Ducalox laxative pills and replaced the Valium with it and hid the real stuff. Needless to say, he and his buddies came down with a bad case of the flu. And it was funny to see all of them running to the bathroom at the funeral home when his mom passed. I kept that Valium bottle filled with Ducalox until the day I moved out and left it there. Petty revenge. Neighbor dog poop. When your neighbor's dog poops in your yard, you politely knock on their door to let them know, but they ignore you. So you put on disposable gloves and toss the shit over their lawn. Last October, their dog destroyed my Halloween decorations, thankfully. They were very cheap, and while they replaced them, they still don't control their kids or their dog. Honestly, I regret buying a house next to such awful neighbors. The next step is calling animal control if it continues, but I'm not even sure they'll do anything. The only reason I don't feel accomplished here is because it started snowing right after, and now the grass is covered in snow. Next time, after calling animal control, I'm going to leave the poop right at their doorway. Surprise, you stepped in shit. Petty revenge. Here's to a Soapy windshield. I lived in a small, crowded city just across the river from New York. Parking was free but very limited. Would have to cruise a long time to find an empty spot. One bitterly cold evening, I lucked out and found a big spot right in front of my apartment door. I pulled up to back into it, blinker was on, and a guy with a smaller car pulled in head first. Sitting there stunned, he got out and gave me the finger and walked off smiling. About 100 a.m., I got a bar of soap and wrote clean, but derisive messages on every window of his car and completely covered the windshield so that it would be impossible to drive without cleaning. With the weather so frigid, he would have to use a lot of warm water to remove all the soap. The temperature alone would freeze water in no time, and he would be very cold with the amount of time it would take him. Next morning at 600 a.m., the car was gone, so I can only imagine his irritation, but I let him know I was the guy pulling into this spot that he selfishly took. Told him I have his license plate number, and if I ever see him steal another spot, I will ratchet up the revenge. I didn't see his reaction, but what I envisioned was satisfying enough. Petty revenge. Be an arse, I will make you late. This happened back in 2012-2013. I was driving downtown looking for a parking spot. One opened up right on the road where I needed to be. I put my signal on and made that move all drivers make slightly to the right, indicating I'm taking that parking spot. I was getting ready to parallel park and a transit bus pulls right up behind me, up against my bumper, so I cannot back. Now my view is, this is a professional driver, and they should know better, so I, being the petty guy I am, sat there waiting for him to back up. At this point, the bus driver is starting to wave his hands and lean on his horn. I am a patient guy, and I decided to wait him out as he's honking his horn. I have a few hours to kill, so I am not concerned about the time, whereas the transit driver has a tight schedule, so I know he's not happy. I pull out my work notebook and start doing some work. He's getting more angry and trying to intimidate me to move. The thing is, I'm a big guy, 6'6" and 200 pounds, so I am not going to be intimidated. This is the main downtown thoroughfare, and traffic is starting to back up considerably. Eventually, someone with authority comes along and basically tells the bus driver he is wrong. However, because of traffic now, he cannot back up, and I do not want to give up my parking spot. So I agreed to move ahead just enough for the bus to pull out into the opposing traffic lane and pass me. That's allowing me into my parking spot. I am confident that he will not try to pull that move again. And I had the satisfaction of watching him sweat, knowing that he is now behind schedule, and at some point, we'll have to explain that to his boss. Petty revenge. The reason why my ex is my ex. Many years ago, after the birth of my oldest son, I desperately needed a job. I was scouring through the job section of as many newspapers as I could get my hands on. The pickings were slim, as my highest qualification was graduating high school. I had to ignore minimum wage jobs because it would cost more than it paid. Then my ex said some magic words: "Stop being so picky. You're never going to earn more than minimum wage." I saw red. Then I found the ad. They advertised free training to become a software engineer, professional certification, and get you a job afterwards. The only requirement was a high school diploma with a passing math grade. At first I was very wary because it definitely felt like it was too good to be true and possibly a scam. But I had nothing to lose by just checking it out. So off I went. The first day of the acceptance process was grueling. Multiple timed aptitude tests that took hours. The ones who passed were invited for a second round of tests. This time there were a lot less people. Out of the 30 people from the first day, only 2 of us were accepted at the end. And it wasn't a scam. The reason why it was free was because the employers would pay for the training. I was thrilled. Then followed the most intense 4 months of my life. I was determined to prove my ex wrong. 8 hours in class every weekday. Another 6 for homework and studying. Then studying and doing a weekend project for another 20 hours over the weekend. I only got about 6 hours of sleep each night. Thankfully, my son was sleeping through the night by then. And I made it. Did really well in my final exams too. The job search was short and sweet. And since it was only 3 years before Y2K, and even entry-level engineers were earning good salaries, when I got my offer, my salary was more than my ex got. Internally, I was elated and thought, "Take that, you insufferable prick." Didn't say it out loud though. As time went by, I kept getting really good raises and promotions. My ex finally had enough of the humiliation and wanted a divorce. I jumped at the chance to escape. And that is how my ex became my ex. Etta. While I was studying, my mother took care of my son, and my in-laws helped with groceries and utilities. My ex could only afford to pay for rent and gas. Petty revenge. Made the truck driver back way up. As I was leaving a store, I was backing out of a space in a narrow single-lane parking aisle, one way headed away from the store. And just as I backed out, a large truck with a trailer proceeded to pull out of a double spot much further down, where there were lots of empty spaces for him to maneuver. But instead of exiting the correct way, he decided to turn and go against traffic. I saw this happening and could have pulled back into my spot and wait for him to exit, but nope. I had to teach him a lesson for going the wrong way, especially in a narrow single-lane aisle. So I proudly drove toward him as he drove toward me. I thought he'd get the hint and stop, but he didn't until we got pretty close. He honked. I honked. I stared him down. He finally conceded and backed up that trailer about 20 parking spots. Petty revenge. The day I was invisible. Years ago, I worked at a public school. The district assigned us a temporary administrator. A man who knew what was wrong with everyone and everything, and just how to fix it all. He drove us up the wall. I spent his entire time with us, making bets on who would be first to cram him into a locker. One thing he hated was how other people would go to deal with things, leaving the command center the office instead of commanding. One day he walked into the office, and the receptionist was in the restroom. The principal was in a meeting, and the office manager had gone to look at something. I, the registrar, was working head down at my desk. That man walked into the middle of the room and announced on the radio to 15 people, criticizing all of them, including the principal in her meeting. "This office is completely empty. What if a parent walked in?" He was 5 feet from me. I picked up my radio and said to him and 15 other people, "Doctor, I'm right here. Hi, your glasses are on your head, sir." Small but very satisfying. Petty revenge. Sometimes it may backfire. My ex-husband was a very recent amputee, like it of the hospital 2 days recent. He's also a chef, so when I told him I was going to a certain grocery store, he insisted he had to go with me. We parked in the handicap spot with the wheelchair area so I could help him in and out. When we came out, some asshole had parked in the wheelchair access area so close that I couldn't even open his door. No placard or plate to indicate they needed a handicap parking spot, and one just wasn't available. I lost my shit. I was tired, stressed, and angry. So I took my keys and basically destroyed the side of the car that was closest to mine. I got in the driver's seat so I could back out and load my ex in the traffic lane, and my car wouldn't start. It took about 30-45 minutes to get it started loose battery connector before I could get out of there. By this time, I'd sort of calmed down about the parking. I'd wheeled my ex inside to stay warm, but I was so afraid they'd come out and there would be a physical altercation. Luckily, I never saw them, but I've never seriously considered doing that again. Hopefully, they never considered parking like that again. Either way, I have no regrets. They deserved it. Petty revenge. Steal my package, get an unpleasant, probably surprise. I'm not sure if this counts, but it makes me laugh to this day. This was maybe 3 years ago, when I'd just turned 18, birthday is in March. I ordered a package from Spencer's, the spicy kind, to be shipped to my mum's apartment. Her apartment is on the bad side of town, so I informed her of this package to ensure it didn't get stolen. I waited like a week for this package. I was excited because it was my first order as an adult. I checked the tracking number day in and day out, and the day finally came. My package was out for delivery. I texted Mum and waited. Checked the tracking again. It said it was delivered. Mom hasn't received it. My sister hasn't seen it either. So I can only come to one conclusion. It was stolen anyways. I'm not sure what happened exactly, but it tickles me to think that someone stole my package from her porch, only to find a personal item. It was never brought back or anything like that, and I did report it and got a new one, but the story is still funny and I laugh when I think about it. Petty revenge. Why I decided to go bald. I was getting a buzz cut weekly because of a cowlick. I had that would bug me if my hair got too long. I thought my mom who used to cut my hair was making it up. But no, it's a real thing, lol. It was costing me $25 including tip, at a local haircuttery place. I hated that place. It was usually full of people with children who wouldn't keep still. And I'd get a barber man or woman who couldn't cut me properly at times. I was going from a buzz cut 3 to a buzz cut 1, and sometimes I'd look like Alfalfa from the Little Rascals movie. I was ticked off. I decided to find an actual barber. I found someone who did it in his spare time, since he was retired. My cost including tip was $30, $25, $5 tip. Cash only as well. So I had to stop at the ATM before I got there as well, because I don't carry cash hardly anymore tbh. Well, I have 2 disabled sisters who sometimes make it hard for me to go in and see him on my usual day Saturday. Well, one week, I was extremely busy with one of my sisters being at home. So I asked my mom if she'd cut my hair for me just once. She said sure, no issues, and it came out great. I finally was able to get out and see him on my usual Saturday the following week, and he accused me of going somewhere else. He knows the situation in my house, as I told him it's hectic a lot of times here, lol. After I explained my mom cut it 4 times in a row, I shouldn't have to explain my situation to you or anyone else. Do you want my business? I said FK this and decided to start cutting my own hair. I now use a simple Gillette razor and shave my hair on my time, and I'm saving $30 weekly. I wonder how he feels knowing he lost a lifelong customer over his assumptions. TLDR, barber got pissed because I missed a week after I had my mom cut it, and he didn't believe me when I told him so. So I decided to finally go bald and do it myself with a razor, now saving me money weekly. Petty revenge. Tow truck company threatened to dump my car in a ditch over a $36 payment. Due to some recent snow, my car slid off my driveway and got stuck in a ditch next to my house. I contacted insurance roadside assistance and they picked a random local tow truck company to wench my car out. I carefully checked with insurance before the rescue to verify that it was not an emergency, and I verified that it was completely covered by insurance. My insurance sent me a written verification that it was covered. The tow truck driver arrived and got my car unstuck. After he was complete, I asked if he needed anything, and he said he needed to check on payments. I told him that I had written statement showing it's supposed to be covered by insurance. He got back in his truck and drove away, so I assumed everything was good. Nope. About 15 minutes later, I get a call from the tow company owner demanding that I pay $36, or they weren't going to release my car. I was confused because my car was parked in my driveway and the driver was long gone. So I said my insurance says it's covered, so please send an invoice and I can send that to them. The owner started screaming at me that that's not how this works. You must pay the remainder or we aren't leaving. I was like, your driver is gone. He's not supposed to do that. He will come back and block your driveway until you pay $36. You cheapskates make me sick. He will come back and put your car back in the ditch. At this point, I was kind of stunned and laughed at her and said, sure, you come back and put my car in the ditch, which made her so mad she hung up. A little bit later, I got a text with an invoice showing I owed an additional $125 for a waiting fee. I texted her back asking where the driver was waiting because my property was empty. She claimed that GPS and the dash cam proved he was in my driveway. I responded with, well, he must be invisible because no one is here, and she stopped responding. My insurance eventually agreed to pay the $36 balance. I have never had a small business owner behave this way to me. I sent in bad reviews to all the sites I could find and did a complaint to the BBB. Is there anything else I can do as petty revenge? I know Reddit loves tow truck companies. Edit the company is responding to the reviews, blaming me for not knowing in advance I owed $36 and saying it was a completely professional conversation. Part 2, tow truck company threatened to dump my car in a ditch over $36 payment. The owner called my employer to lodge a complaint about me and is threatening to take me to court. The day after the incident, I had just begun my pettiness campaign against the tow truck company. I had just submitted some negative reviews on a few sites and subsequently dropped their Yelp score by a whole 1.5 points. At the start of the workday, I was socializing and told a few colleagues about how a tow truck company had threatened me over $36. A colleague mentioned that they knew the family of people who run that company, and they are a bunch of bullies. The owner's husband apparently isn't welcome at school sport functions anymore because of inappropriate racial comments he made. During the workday, my boss stopped by to say some very unhappy woman had called to complain about me. Fortunately, he had heard my situation and eventually put two and two together about what was going on. My boss said he quickly dismissed her and thought she would complain to his superior about the both of us. He was very cool about the situation, but needless to say, I was embarrassed and ticked off that she escalated the situation to a professional setting. My name is unique enough, so Googling it and the city where I live leads to my employer profile, so I am pretty sure this is how she figured it out where I work. At this point, my previous post was cooking, and the suggestions were getting really good. I don't know what she was trying to accomplish by complaining to my job about me, but it only strengthened my resolve to go scorched earth on this company. By the end of the day yesterday, I had done the following acts of pettiness. Updated my reviews on 4 sources, including social media, to include the fact she had called my job to complain about me and included screenshots of the text message exchange. They were careful to write in a slightly more professional language. It is funny though now if you search the company on Google, it shows an image of a tow truck and 3x4 screenshots of texts between me and her about where this giant tow truck is allegedly parked in my driveway. The company commented on the reviews about how drivers are not instructed to wait on properties. But the texts clearly say if I don't pay, the driver will keep waiting and the fees will increase. The comments all say the discussion was completely professional, which is a laugh, but unfortunately I don't have a recording of the conversation. Submitted a complaint to the BBB. It was received and submitted to the company yesterday. They have 14 days to respond. I asked for an apology to myself and my employer with no additional contact. Petitioned my insurance provider to blacklist the company. I sent in the screenshots and a description of events to my insurance. The insurance agent I spoke with was super unhappy when she heard the company was still contacting me and my employer after they had paid the $36. Submitted a complaint to the local tow truck association in my state. Submitted a complaint to a billing software company that handles invoices for this company. I am not sure this will do anything but worth a shot. Submitted a complaint for the Bureau of Consumer Protection for potential fraud about the alleged truck in my driveway, which did not exist. I saved security footage from the time the driver was at my house. I have multiple angles of my car being stuck to my car being freed, my car parking, and the driver driving away and not returning. I don't have thermal on my security cameras, so I couldn't see him when he came back with his cloaking device. Still need to do. Contact the State Attorney General Consumer Affairs Division. Look into complaining to 311. I am not sure if I can get the company blacklisted from other insurance companies of which I am not a member. Things I am probably not going to do. Put them on blast on Reddit or TikTok YouTube. This seems like a potential defamation lawsuit, but I honestly don't know enough about it to make a decision. Go to the press. My job requires a squeaky clean social profile, so I don't want to risk that because of an unpleasant experience with a tow company. At the end of the day, I found that the company had blocked me on social media I mostly never use. I also received a text asking from the owner that stated the following. Paraphrase of the text leaving out identifying information. But I left the typos. Owner, please do not contact this number or our business anyone. Owner, I have never seen someone act this crazy over $36. Myself agreed, please don't contact this number again. Owner, I'm going to the sheriff office. I said to stop. Myself, that's your prerogative. I was agreeing to end communication. Owner, we will see you in court. I guess I need to lawyer up Reddit. If anyone has any additional suggestions, I would be glad to keep my campaign going. Petty revenge. How to silence a monster. I'll just say it bluntly at the start here, my genetic father is a horrible human being. By this point, I have completely cut contact with him. However, this happened on the very last time I ever had to see him. My mother left him when I was about 13-ish. However, due to his lies and manipulation, the court system failed me, and I was still forced to see him. So the abuse he inflicted continued until I was 18, and only got worse after the divorce because he knew that hurting me meant it would hurt my mother. He is the absolute definition of trash, and my rather unique situation was only fuel on this dumpster fire. I won't go into too great of detail about his depravity, but I will simplify it and say that if you weren't a straight white man or a straight woman in a prairie dress, then you were going to hell in his eyes and didn't deserve the time of day. As for me, being born as both genders, it was a living hell. I am intersex, which basically means I have incomplete traits from both sides. I actually didn't even find this out until I was almost an adult. However, I had a lot of health problems because of it, and due to looking highly androgynous growing up, I was called a freak. At birth, I was signed off as a girl, and when I began having some unique changes with puberty, it was drilled into me that I was basically just an ugly woman who didn't deserve anything because I didn't meet my father's standards. The discussion about my gender and who I am is a very long story. However, as an adult, I made the choice for both my physical and mental health to become fully male. Due to my father, there were only two people in my entire family who knew about this. My mother and my grandmother on my father's side. My mother is an amazing person and was extremely happy for me, and my grandmother was the sweetest woman you'd ever meet. Picture the stereotypical grandma who bakes cookies in children's books, and that was her. The woman would give her last penny just to make sure you felt happy and safe. She was delighted to hear that I was starting to find who I was. My grandfather passed away shortly after I was born, however. My grandmother started dating again many years later, and when I was 18, I got an invitation to her wedding. She was in her 70s and acting like a teenager with her new fiancé, and it was amazing to see her so happy. Of course I wanted to go. There was just one problem. My father would be there too. At this point, I was already on hormone therapy for my treatments, had facial hair, a flat chest, didn't even look like my old self anymore, and I didn't want to think of the hell that would rain down from my father seeing me like this. But then I stopped myself in that moment and thought about it a little more. And after a bit of contemplating, I figured this would be perfect. He'd always lied to family about what happened, painting himself as this loving father, so what kind of perfect dad wouldn't be happy for their son? Out of absolute spite, I went to a thrift store, got myself a classy black and purple gown, got some makeup, a pair of heels, and went to the wedding in full drag. My mother questioned as to why I was dressing up like a woman for this instead of just grabbing my suit. And when I told her what I was going to do, she broke out into full belly laughter and began insisting on helping me get ready to go. The wedding was lovely, everyone was smiling, my grandmother was glowing the entire time, and I actually didn't see my father for the bulk of the reception. We had a big family, so I wasn't really surprised. However, at the end, as everyone was talking and getting cake, that's when my father spotted me. By this point, most of the family didn't even recognize me, however. When I was standing next to my father must have put the pieces together and started walking over. I told my mother to go and be with my grandmother, and I was now left alone with my abuser in a crowd of people. He came right up to me, asked how I was doing, and I just shrugged and continued people watching. He leaned against the wall with me, and just as I expected, he began lecturing me. He pointed to my grandmother and now step-grandfather and said, "You see that? Make sure you get yourself a good man like that, someone who makes enough to support you so you can stay home." I looked over at him, and in my now deep voice, I said very simply, "That would be great if I didn't have a girlfriend." I wish I had a camera right at that moment, just to capture the image of his eyes growing wide as he choked on his own words, and for the first time, he was left speechless. I could see him getting angry and trying hard to contain it, but I didn't care. I just casually waved over my grandmother. She came over smiling, and for the very first time, I spoke openly with her in front of my father, telling her about my girlfriend and my journey into becoming a man. She was thrilled for me having a girlfriend, giving me a huge hug, and telling me to invite her so that she could come celebrate with everyone. And so, that's exactly what I did. My father remained speechless, just staring at me as his face turned red, not daring to say a damn thing in front of his own mother and the entire family. This was the one time that he was forced to be a decent human being to his child, because he was surrounded by everyone he had lied to, and he was stuck between that lie and the man he really was. After a while of him just stewing in his very clear anger, he turned around and left without a word, walking out on his own mother's wedding. My grandmother had me and my mother sit with her and her now husband at a table, and we all laughed and ate, enjoying our time together and making memories without him. My step-grandfather asked why my father left so suddenly and asked if everything was all right. And when I told him what happened, he looked at me with a sigh and said, "This is supposed to be a joining of families today. If he doesn't want to be a part of that family, then so be it." Petty revenge. It's not just people who can be petty. So this morning I let the hounds out for their morning business. When they came back and my 7-year-old bitch was grumpy and Revid growled at the not quite 3-year-old meathead who had woken up refreshed and playful. The old girl goes into her crate bed for solitude, so Meathead lays down in front of the door, just staring at her. No way she can get out without him moving. Classic sibling type, "I'm not touching you" stuff. This is all happening whilst I'm making morning coffee mind. Anyways, by the time my coffee is ready, Meathead has decided the stare down isn't enough, and has turned around to lay on his back with his arse and balls at her door instead. Lumfao, anyone who says dogs can't be spiteful or petty,